Hello everyone, welcome to our first module on our sports seminar, Sports Tourism class. And this module is entitled Introduction to Tourism Principles. So basically, before we get into the nitty-gritty of sports tourism, we will have to discuss first the general aspects of tourism. And for this specific video under this module, we will be answering the question, what is tourism? So what is tourism? According to the United Nations World Tourism Organization or the UNWTO, tourism is the social, cultural, economic phenomenon that entails the movement of people to countries or places outside their usual environment for purposes that are personal, for business-related purposes, or professional-related purposes. So later on, we will be discussing these specific aspects in detail so that we will be able to differentiate tourism from other related activities. So tourism has something to do with their activities, some of which will involve some sort of tourism expenditure. So we'll discuss about what tourism expenditure means. So what is an activity in relation to tourism? So the activity should take place within 24 hours in that different area and should not last for more than a year. Okay, so mas maigse sa isang taon at mas mahaba sa isang araw before we can say that a certain person is an actual visitor in a given tourist area. Now, if you're going away from your place of residence and visiting another place, like for example, pupunta ka ng Batangas para ikaw ay mag-beach, no? And then you stay in that beach for until 5 p.m. and then after 5 p.m. you go home na, pabalik sa Maynila, then you are considered an excursionist because an excursionist does the tourism activities for 24 hours only or less. No? The area is not very far usually from the usual residence, syempre because 24 hours nga lang. And if you go beyond the 24 hours or ikaw ay nag-overnight, then that's the time you are considered a tourist in that area. So that's the difference between a full-fledged tourist or visitor compared to an excursionist or excursionista ang tawag nila. Now, when are you considered a resident in that place? One, of course, if you were born there, that's the first idea. But number two also is that if you've stayed in that place for more than 1 year. So for example, ikaw ay taga-probinsya and you have been enrolled in De La Salle University for let's say 1-2 years already, then in Manila you are not considered as a tourist. Residente ka na because you've been there for more than 1 year. So that's the only time you're considered a resident, no? So usually tourism activities, again, like I said, it should be less than 1 year, no? And that's the time we can say that a certain person is a tourist. Now, for example, no, ikaw ay nakatira sa Baguio. No? You live in Baguio, you're a resident in Baguio, and then you decide to visit Mines View Park. Now, even if you stay in Mines View Park for more than 24 hours, I don't know why, but if you do stay there for 24 hours, you're still not considered a tourist. Why? Because again, the conditions in order for you to be called a tourist or even an excursionist is that you have to be in a place that it's not your usual residence. So dahil nakatira ka sa Baguio, pumunta ka ng Mines View Park, you are not considered a tourist in Mines View Park but still a resident because you live in that specific area. Now, like I said earlier, tourism has something to do with tourists participating in some sort of tourism-related activity. And when they do participate in tourism-related activity, a part of being a tourist is that they should also be shelling out some sort of tourism expenditure. Okay, so what is tourism expenditure? So tourism expenditure is money coming from origin to provide income to the area visited. So for example, international tourists elsewhere would come to the Philippines and they bring with them their foreign currencies like their dollars, their euros, or whatever. And then they will use that to pay for their accommodation like the hotels, the restaurants where they will eat, and the attractions that they will be participating in. So that's an example of a tourism expenditure. The money that they earned from their places where they came from is being used to be able to provide income to the place that they are visiting. Okay, and that is also the reason why we cannot consider overseas workers as tourists in the same area where they work, because the money that they earned in order for them to engage in the activities in that specific area has also been earned in the same area. So it's not really money being transferred or income being transferred from one area to another. This is also the same if we talk about domestic tourism. Like for example, me, I'm a Manileño. I'm going to go, for example, to Palawan, to Puerto Princesa, and visit some of the attractions there. The money that I will be spending for accommodations, for restaurants, for the different attractions and different activities that I will go through there, I've earned that from Manila. So there is a transfer from an urban area in Manila to a rural transfer of income or money, and that is called tourism expenditure as well. Now, tourism activities can also be categorized into active and passive activities. So active activities is wherein the tourist has direct participation in the activities being offered by the said destination. So let's give a sort of sports tourism example on this one. So for example, you go to Kamsur and you participate in the wakeboarding. So ikaw mismo ay mag-wakeboarding or mag-surfboarding sa mga alon ng Kamsur or ng Siargao, then you are considered an active tourist. No? Now, you are considered a passive tourist or you partake in passive tourist, but if you do not take part or you do not engage in that activity. So if you go to Kamsur and your goal is just to watch people doing surfboarding, then you are considered as a passive tourist, or it's considered as a passive activity. Another distinguishing factor that differentiates a visitor who is a tourist and a visitor that is not a tourist is that visitor should not be compensated in that area that he is visiting. So, ibig sabihin, if the person is an overseas Filipino worker, she's a nurse in London or a nurse in the States or a skilled worker in Saudi Arabia or Abu Dhabi, that person who does activities as a part of his or her work is not considered a tourist kahit pa sabihin natin na that person is a resident of the Philippines. Pangalawa, for example, you are a member of the band Ben and Ben and you were invited to be to do a concert in La Union. That specific time wherein you are playing in La Union and you're getting paid for the music that you play for the people who are attending a party, you are not a tourist at that time because you are there in order to work and make money for whatever talent that you are doing. Now, what if, sir, I'm there to attend a business meeting only, or I'm there to attend some sort of sports training in a different country or in a different place that's not my resident. Can I not be considered as a tourist? Actually, yes, you can be considered as one. In that specific time that you are in a business meeting or you are making your money for doing concert, or you are there for your sports training, you are not considered as a tourist. But for example, after the training or after the meeting or after the concert, you go and visit an attraction or engage yourself in a tourist activity, then that's the time, in that specific moment, in that specific area, then that's the time you are considered a tourist. Okay, so here in this chart, we are able to see those people we can consider as visitors that are tourists in the left side of this chart, and those who are not tourists in the right side of this chart. So as you can see, your non-tourist travelers include your workers, short-term and long-term workers, and of course you have your nomads or refugees who are entering a different country or a different area, but they aren't there to do some sort of tourism activity, or they're not there to give out tourism expenditures. they're there to seek support from the host community. And then transit passengers, like for example, you are going to Sweden and you have to stop by the United Arab Emirates first, then you are not a tourist in United Arab Emirates unless you do some sort of tourism activity within the airport. Cruise on public modes of transport, so for example, the flight attendants or the seamen are not considered as your tourists as well. And of course, you have other people who establish their residence. So for example, if you want to go to Singapore and you basically want to eventually become a permanent resident there after many years of working, then you're not considered a tourist there. Long-term students, no, for example, you are from the province, no, and you were able to study in Lasal and you've been in Manila for a long period of time because you have been studying here, so you're not considered a tourist anymore in Manila because you're here to study for a long period of time. And other people like armed forces who are visiting for purposes of military exercises, diplomats, and other government officials, they're not considered as tourists. Of course, we have here also in the left side who are those visitors we consider as tourists. And of course, we have the same day visitors, which are your excursionists, and we have the overnight visitors or the full-fledged tourists. And of course, there are many different purposes why a certain person goes for a tour. Then, of course, it includes business or professional motivations. You have holidays, leisure, and recreation. So you're just there to relax. You're just there to entertain yourselves. Some are also visiting another place because that is where some of their relatives are. Some people do their tours for short-term learning, like seminars. And then, of course, other people do medical tourism. They actually go to another area, like for example, in Thailand, to have certain procedures done for them, and then at the same time, after or around the operation or the procedure time in the hospital, they also engage in some sort of tourism activity. Some people also go for tourism for purposes of pilgrimage or religion, like for example, the yearly visit to the Mecca by the Muslims. And of course, some people go there for shopping. No? Some destinations for shopping tourism is of course Hong Kong, Thailand, Singapore, and then of course some actually have transit, no, tourism, those who actually stay for a long period of time in the transit area where they are going to be connected to their next flight. So yon. And then of course we have those tourists who are coming from another country, no, the international tourists. And of course we have those tourists who come within the country but from another region of the country, and we have the domestic tourists. Now, travel and tourism are two very related terms. No, but while they are related, they aren't necessarily the same. So all tourism activities will always have a travel component to it, but not all travel activities will have a tourism component to it because some people travel for purposes of work as well. Now we'll talk about the different forms of tourism in terms of who are the people who are visiting or where they're coming from. So the first type of tourism is domestic tourism, wherein a resident visitor within the country of reference, either as part of a domestic trip or part of an outbound trip. So for example, I am from Manila, I go to Palawan. So I am considered a domestic tourist. So if it's movement within a country, it's domestic tourism. Now it's called outbound tourism if we consider the activities of a resident visitor outside the country of reference. So for example, if the country of reference is the Philippines, and I, a Filipino who is residing here in the Philippines, goes to Thailand or goes to Singapore, goes to Malaysia or goes somewhere else, that is called an outbound tourism of the Philippines. So the Filipinos going out of the country for tourism purposes are called outbound tourists. And the third form is inbound tourism, which encompasses the activity of a non-resident visitor within a country on an inward trip. So we're talking about if the country of reference is the Philippines, the foreigners who come here from other countries are considered inbound tourists. Okay, so that's pretty simple. Now we can further categorize tourism based on the purposes of the travelers or the tourists that come in a certain area. So, of course, the most common type of tourism is leisure tourism. You come here to relax, to entertain yourself for recreation purposes. Next, you have your business purposes, or generally we call them as MICE, or meetings, incentives, conventions, and events tourism. Then, some people also go for tourism for purpose of education, short-term education. And then we have special interest tourism. Like for example, we have dark tourism. Dark tourism is where people go to attractions that have a component of eeriness or fear. For example, you go to Corregidor ruins to experience the death and the ghostly experience that is being talked about in that town. You also have like a specific subset. We have volunteer tourism, wherein some people go to from a rich country to a poorer country to do volunteer work, charitable institutions. And then we also have religious tourism, who goes to from one place to another for purposes of religious fulfillment. Like for example, Christians who would go to Nazareth to visit the birthplace of Jesus Christ, or again, like I said, the Muslims who go to Mecca. Some also do cultural or heritage tourism, wherein they visit another place in order to learn about and experience the culture of a certain area. Another type of tourism is we have adventure tourism. So adventure tourism is those people who go to another place in order to experience some sort of adventure that they can experience in their place of residence. So ayan. Next, we have nature-based tourism. So this is the type of tourism wherein you want to be exposed to green area. No? And then also we have ecotourism. The difference between nature-based tourism and ecotourism is like all of the package, because you are so passionate about caring for the environment. It's not just going to an area that is clean or going to an area that is foresty or that is environmentally sane, but also you choose the whole itinerary as eco-friendly. Like for example, you wouldn't ride a train during your trip because you know that it will increase the carbon footprint. So those are the examples of ecotourism. The whole experience, from the transport to the accommodation to the attractions, must be very environmentally friendly in order for it to become ecotourism tourism. No? Next, we have shopping tourism. So you go to another place to shop. And of course, sports tourism, you go to a certain place in order to participate or passively or actively in a specific sport event or sports attraction. And we will have a specific discussion, a large discussion of it towards the second half of this course. And we have also gaming tourism. No? For example, if you've been to Macau, that's one of their attractions: gaming, casino, gambling, etc., etc. So in order to legitimize tourism as a formal discipline, it had to have its own conceptual framework. And the one that made the formal conceptual framework for tourism was Laper, and it was first introduced in 1979, and the latest version was done in 2008. Now, basically, for every tourism exchange or tourism experience, there will always be a traveler-generating region and a tourism destination region. A place where tourists come from and a place where tourists go to. So, for example, I am a Manileño and I decided to go to Zambales. Probably for purposes of going to the beach, for example. So basically, the traveler generating region for that specific exchange is Manila, where I am coming from. And the tourism destination region is Zambales. Okay? So another example, Americans would go to Thailand for purposes of cultural or heritage tourism. So the traveler generating region in that specific experience is the United States of America, and the tourism destination region would be Thailand. Okay? So ayan. Now obviously, the travelers who are coming from the traveler generating region are called the departing travelers. And those who are coming from the tourism destination going back to the traveler generation region, they're called the returning travelers. Now, tourism is not only concerned with what is happening in the traveler generating region and also the tourism destination region, but tourism is also concerned with what happens in transit. So what happens in airports, what happens in planes, what happens in trains, and the experience they go through in that transit is also an issue for tourism. So that's the transit route region in the transportation sector of tourism is also a part of it. So in this video, what is tourism? We were able to define what a tourist is. We were able to categorize tourist and tourism experiences. We were able to differentiate residents from visitors, from excursionists, and from workers. And we were able to discuss about the conceptual framework of tourism.